So we're thinking about dads today. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4 is a little verse here. And fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. So we're going to think about this verse and just kind of think about dads today. I read something this week entitled 50 Reasons Why It's Good to Be a Man. So I'm not going to tell you all 50, but I'm going to give you the top 10. Here's number 10. You know stuff about tanks. Number 9. You can go to the bathroom without a support group. Number 8. If someone forgets to invite you to something, he can still be your friend. Number 7, you can drop by to see a friend without bringing a little gift. Number 6, if another guy shows up at the same party in the same outfit, you might become lifelong buddies. Number 5, one wallet, one pair of shoes, one color, all seasons. Number 4, Terry heard this in the early service. He's still laughing, man. That's good. That's good, man. That's good. Because the rest of them, nothing. Where was I? Number 4, there's always a game on somewhere. Number 3, your pals can be trusted never to trap you with. So, notice anything different? Number 2, if something mechanical doesn't work, you can bash it with a hammer and throw it across the room. And number 1, you can do your nails with a pocket knife. One day, a mother, she made the mistake of leaving her baby daughter in her husband's care while she was busy doing work in another room. He immediately, this is all fluff here, he immediately buried himself in the newspaper and forgot all about the baby until he heard a series of thumps followed by a horrendous cry. Instantly, he knew that the baby had fallen down the stairs. He called out to his wife, "Honey, come quick, our little girl just took her first 24 steps." Steve and Annie Chapman asked their children, this is a scary thing to do, to make a list of what they heard them say most often. Here's what they got from their kids. "I'm not talking just to hear my jaws flap. You just ate." That went on a lot at our house. "It'll be good for you. Sit back and buckle up. Not another word. Don't touch each other. There are starving children in Africa. Were you born in a barn? Don't you look at me like that. I'll give you something to cry about. Ask your mother. Ask your father. That drives me nuts. Do you want to live to see your next birthday?" These are Christian parents, by the way. And then there's the mixed messages like, "Shut your mouth and eat." Then there's, "Hurry up and don't run." And "Don't be a smart aleck." Well, I found a guy by the name of John Dresser, and John wrote a little book And it's if I could do it all over again. And he's talking about being a dad, being a father. Of course, it applies both ways. Moms, dads. Mom, this is not your day off. You can hear these things too and listen, but particularly for dads. And there's 8 things that he listed off, and they're really, really good. So it's making me think. I hope it makes you think and consider and ponder your life as a dad. First of all, he says, number 1, if I could do it all over again, I would love my wife more. Because by loving my children's mother more, I would create, he says, an environment of security in our home. Point being that if you love your wife more and if you exhibit that love towards her in the home, your kids are going to see it, right? They're going to see it. And that means a lot. That means a whole lot. Versus just being a talker, or just talking about what we're supposed to be doing, or talking about how we're supposed to be loving others. And if we just give the religious talk and then in our actions, we're disrespectful, we don't have that servant attitude and that honoring attitude and that loving attitude, our kids are going to pick up on all that kind of stuff. And I shared with the boys, I said, when you're considering a life mate, you probably want to consider how, in our case, how her mom and dad treat each other. Because more than likely, what's going to happen after you get married is that kind of what's been modeled in the home is what's going to be exhibited in your home. Now, that's not always the case, and certainly none of us were raised in perfect homes, and we had strengths and weaknesses that were modeled, and we're asking God to change our lives. But you're trying to go into the marriage without too many surprises. There are going to be surprises, but there are some knowns if you just look around and pay attention to some of the data. And that's one of the things that you consider. Because the way we're raised is we're usually going to go in that same kind of pattern. But we know that God can change our lives. But obviously, love for a husband towards his wife is paramount. That's why it's number 1. I don't know that you could get any better than that. If you exhibit that, you're really doing something really well. You're really leading in the right direction and helping your kids in the long run for their own lives. Second, I would laugh more, he said. I would relax more. And John says, and I would laugh more. And that means laughing at yourself, too. We talked about that, I think, some on Mother's Day, and just trying to not take life so seriously because, boy, there are a lot of serious issues out there, and we can sometimes have the tendency to get on edge. And we need to catch ourselves. We need to think about a lot of things in our morning and for the day and that kind of thing. And I think it would be helpful if one of the things we think about is, hey, how could today be in some ways lighthearted, be kind of fun. And when you're a parent, when you're a dad, you may want to think about pulling pranks on your kids sometimes. That would probably be a good thing, and surprise them. I wasn't the biggest prankster, but I think I did one time when the kids were little. I told them the phone was for them, and I had shaving cream on the phone, and then they got it up to their phone, got it all over their face. That was pretty cool. But, laughing. So, and about yourself, so the kids and I, we get together, and we review stories together like RA camp. That was a lot of fun things happen then, like when Drew got his big toe caught in the threshold of the dormitory, and he couldn't get it out, and had to call the camp director to come out there and help Drew get his big toe out of the threshold. That was funny, And then when Allison was there that time at GA camp, she took like 28 girls. 28. And one of the girls out of the 28 came with a stomach virus. And so she passed that stomach virus on to every single one of the 28 girls. And so, the Bible says, in everything give thanks, and I was so thankful that I was on the other side of camp. Man, they were throwing up. God, it was terrible. Oh, you remember that, Allison? Where's Allison? Oh, there you are. But for the boys, it was funny. It was a funny story, something to laugh about. And I used to love it. Kids wanted to know about, what growing up was like for me. And I talked about our one vacation that we went on, the only vacation that we went on growing up. When we went to Lake Livingston, and my dad rented a motor home, and he filled it with meat and all these groceries and everything in the freezer and the refrigerator in that motor home. We were so excited. And we also pulled our boat with our pickup truck to Lake Livingston. And we got there, and as soon as we got there, the generator quit. And Dad worked all week, and I heard Dad say things I never heard him say before, but he was working on that generator. He never got it working. And by the way, if you have a motorhome, I don't know if it's like this today, but so we had to take all that meat out and all the groceries and igloos and ice and do that all week long. And the reason that generator quit is because Dad didn't have the motorhome level. He had it tilted just a little bit, and so the generator won't work if it's not level. So just FYI. And so Dad was trying to get it fixed, and this was just so funny. Dad took it to the filling station to see if the guy up there could help him, and Dad didn't know he wasn't used to the motorhome, and he didn't know how high it was. And you know how you could drive under there, and they have all those long tubular lights, those light bulbs, they go on forever. Dad drove in there, and he just cleared them all out. I thought that was so funny, the way he did all that. And then my kids, they really got a big kick out of, because, when you're growing up, you want to drive. And our pickup had, 3 on the column, right? You go in, you go out, you come down. Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about. But a lot of you do. So I said, Dad, do you think I just... I think he was asleep when I asked him. I said, Dad, you think I could drive the pickup truck around the camp? And he was asleep, so I thought he said yes. So I said, okay. So I wanted to drive it around. Well, we had our boat trailer on there, right? Because the boat's in the water. Normally that's what happens when you go. And so I couldn't get it off. So I thought, well, I'll just drive around with a boat trailer. So I saw this little road. I thought, oh, it'll be neat. I'll go down that little road. And I went down that little road, and that road just ended. I got to back up here. I never backed up on a jackknife the trailer. I broke it right in half. And so I'm thinking, I told the boys, they really laughed at this. I said, I really thought I was dead. I thought I wasn't going to make it to the next day, and I cried all the way from where I was to where Dad was, and I woke him up, of course, told him the news, and he said, hey, it'll be okay, son, and he took me to he took the trailer, we took it, and I remember this day, we found a welder, and he welded it for $75, put it back together. I thought, oh, great, we could take the boat home now, and so we just talk about stories they want to know, and I think all the boys have wrecked a car before, except for Gunner. Gunner, you never wrecked, have you? No, I don't think you have. I think it's the other 3, and Michael was a senior in high school, and one of the kids came over to see him, and he parked, the friend parked his car on the other side of the street in the curb, right where you drive back out of our driveway. And I think Mom told him to go get something at the store, and he didn't check his rearview mirror, and he just backed right into his friend's car. And I don't think he wanted to tell us into his door. He just smashed his door. He didn't want to tell us. And finally, it came out. Obviously, his friend came in and told us. So I said, you know what, Micah? I said, I did the same thing. I said, it ain't no big deal, man. I said, my dad, I had his brand new car. It was about a week old, and I drove it. There was no boat trailer on the back of it, but I parked it diagonally in our driveway, and then I had my little bitty truck parked, and I had to go to the store, and I packed it, not looking, right into my dad's car door and just smashed it all in. And my dad was like, no big deal. He laughed at that. I said, we all make mistakes. We just need to be able to laugh at ourselves sometimes. And Allison wasn't laughing, but we were laughing anyway. But we need to learn and relax more and laugh more. So that was number 2. Number 3, he says, I would present a more realistic model for them to follow. He said, I'd be honest with them about myself. So that's what we're trying to do, is be honest about who we are and, in our lives. And so I told the kids one time about when I skipped school. And I said, you're not supposed to do that. It wasn't a good decision. I grew up between Houston and Galveston, and so a bunch of us decided to go to the beach that day on a Friday. It was my senior year. No, it wasn't. Actually, it was my sophomore year. That's when we did that. So I was 16 years old. And that Monday morning, Mr. Byerslag called me to his office. So he was the 10th grade counselor, and he said, Mr. Clements, he said, we noticed you weren't here Friday in school. And he said, yes, sir, that's right. He said, were you sick? And I said, no, sir. He said, well, where were you? He said, well, I went to the beach. And he said, well, that doesn't really work for us. And he said, so you're going to have D-Hall all week. And so I went to D-Hall Monday afternoon and then Tuesday afternoon after school. And then Wednesday morning he called me in his office and he said, Mr. Clements, he said, you don't have to go to D-Hall the rest of the week. And I said, well, why is that, Mr. Byerslag? He said, well, I asked all your other friends about Friday, and they all said they were sick. They lied, but you told the truth, so you don't have to go to D-Hall anymore because they're not going, so you shouldn't have to go. I said, well, gee, thanks, Mr. Byerslag. So anyway, it was a moment where I got to say I made a bad decision, but then I made a good decision, and of course I wasn't a Christian then, but God blessed me. So now, I say, I'll try to be honest about my life. I haven't told them everything, right? You probably won't either, but I'm trying to, be somewhat open and that'll be helpful for them and that kind of thing. And be honest about when you make a mistake, and so you want to say, forgive me when you do something wrong, and you learn from your mistake and help them learn and as you're doing this together. 4th, he says, I would listen to what they say. This is probably, my family would tell you, this is probably the most difficult for me. Because there are a lot of times that I'll be saying when they're talking to me, and I'll say, what did you say? And they'll say, see, Dad, you're not listening to us when we're talking to you. We can tell you're not listening to us. We can tell that you're thinking about Greek or something stupid like that instead of listening to us. And they're right. They're right. A lot of times I'm thinking about stuff, and so it's important for us to have the discipline in our lives, so we're all work in progress here, to stop and listen. And sometimes our kids really need to say something, and so we need to really stop and listen. And you kind of have that. There's an art and science to figuring that out when there are times, because we read about stories, we hear testimonies of kids sometimes, and there's something that's really bothering them, and they want to tell their parents, they want to talk to them, have a conversation, and their parents don't really understand the need that their kids have to talk, and they're preoccupied with what they're doing. And maybe it's because they're working so hard all the time, just trying to provide a living, and they're tired or whatever, and so they're not going that extra mile, that extra step to want to listen. And then kids, sometimes if they feel like their parents don't listen to them and don't allow them to carry out 3 words without interjecting, really allowing them to talk, then they go and they talk to other people. And they become closer to other people rather than being closer to their parents and their own siblings. And, that's probably not good. So we really have to learn how to become good listeners, and there's an art to that. 5th, he said, I would stop praying for my family so much. Well, that's an unusual thing to say, right? And here's what he says. He said, here's how it usually goes. We'll say in our prayer, God, make my son and daughter good people. Help them to succeed in school. Help them to find the right person to marry. Take care of them and protect them. I know, I say that a lot. Almost every day, if not every day. We're always praying for them, it seems. He says, but I started to realize I needed to pray for myself. I needed to pray that God would give me what I needed to model the right kind of Christian life, to make the right kind of decisions, to lead them, to guide them, to be able to exhibit the kind of conduct that would be worthy of them going, yeah, that's the way you're supposed to live. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. I'd be praying for myself so that I could have the right heart, so that I wouldn't fly off the handle, have knee-jerk reactions, so that I would be steady at the wheel, that kind of thing, the right kind of response, so that even in the midst of the storm, it'd be calm waters inside, so that I could think properly and speak properly and act properly. Well, for that kind of stuff to be going on, gosh, you're going to need to be praying for yourself, So we need lots of prayer, because none of this stuff is easy, as you know. And now, of course, a lot of you are grandparents, and so you see your kids going through a lot of the same stuff that you went through when you were a parent. And that means that you need to be praying for them as well, knowing how much they need it. Next, he says, I would pay more attention to little things. I would begin to appreciate the touch of love and the word of encouragement. It's not going to hurt anything if every once in a while you say, I'm proud of you, son. I'm proud of you, honey. You're doing a good job. You're not perfect. I'm not saying you're perfect. I'm not perfect. But you're headed in the right direction. And one of the things you might want to say is, I appreciate you. I appreciate your listening skills. You're listening to me more. I appreciate that. And I'm praying, I'm asking God to help me to listen to you more. One of the little things would be probably stopping and having a conversation every once in a while. How's it going? Tell me about school. Tell me about your friends. Tell me about your dreams. Where do you see yourself going? How do you feel about life? Hey, here's a good one. Has the Lord been teaching you anything lately? My mentor used to ask me that all the time. Sometimes I'd come up with a big blank. But most of the time, because I knew he was going to ask me that question, I'd get prepared. And I started thinking, every day I need to think about what the Lord is wanting to teach me about life. Seventh, he says, I would create an environment of belonging. This is important. No pretty to it. So here's what we're trying to do. We have this unit called family. Immediate family. We got a family here, but each of us have an immediate family. And some of the things that we're trying to do in this family, one of the things we're trying to do is create this sense of belonging, that your son or your daughter, listen now, feels and thinks and or believes that they belong to your family. Now, that's different than a son or a daughter who's in a family, who lives in the residence of a family, but doesn't believe or think or feel that they belong to it. Does that make sense? There's a big difference. And you don't want the latter, obviously. You want the former. How do you get that to happen? That dynamic, that magic, if you will, okay? With a lot of things that we've just been talking about, they fill into this first little heading. And I'll give you the first little heading in just a second, but the sense of belonging that you're wanting them to feel and think and believe is you want them to sense duty, responsibility, obligation, and you want them to connect to the family in those ways. Because what happens is they get out into the world and there are other groups. See, you've got a group, we call it a family, but there are other groups, and some of those other groups, you know what they call it? You know what they call those, there's plural, those other groups? Do you know what some other groups call those other groups? Family. And many times, a young person, if they haven't bought in to the family that you're representing, they will find another family that they will buy into. And many times the values of this other family is not the same as yours. Matter of fact, it's quite different. And now you've got problems. And now they're interested in having a conversation, and they're interested in building meaningful relationships, for better or for worse, with this other family than with yours. And then the distance just gets greater as time moves on. And then at the dinner table, if they're there, there's no conversation going on, even though you're trying. It's like you're walking into a brick wall. And so when they get out here in this other group that may not have the same values, since they haven't bought into your family, they don't have that sense of duty or obligation. And so now they've got a new set of values. And it doesn't bother them that they're not identifying with what you're representing or trying to representing at home and doing something different out there in the world. That's the problem. And here's, I think, one of the keys in getting your son or daughter to buy in and connect to these things we're talking about with the family and a sense of belonging. And I think the number one heading is fellowship. Koinonia. And that fellowship that we have in this church family with many of us is that we feel connected to each other. You know, I have a sense of duty and obligation and responsibility. I've bought into this thing. And if you get out there and you've got you get a diagnosis from a doctor, I feel that with you. It hurts you, it hurts me. But not everybody in the church is like that. There are a lot of people who go to church today, and it's just another group. They don't really have that close-knit fellowship. And it's the fellowship that connects you. And so when we're talking about fellowship, getting your son or daughter to buy in, to have this sense of belonging. We're talking about these things that he just mentioned, having a conversation, being a listener, not being so hard-nosed. I mean, if you're Mr. Drill Sergeant, that's good for some things, but it's I don't know how much fellowship goes on in a Marine boot camp, D. Maybe with some of your buddies, but not with the drill sergeant. Right? Different guy. Because he's there to keep you alive. He's not there to be your friend. And you're there to keep your kids alive, and so you have some of that, but it's not everything. So fellowship, if there's not many people that I feel a kinship to that I don't feel friendship. Fellowship is about friendship. Yes, you're still a parent, you're still a father, you're still a mother, but are you a friend? Friends listen. Friends share. Friends care. Friends care so much that they ask God to change their own lives so that they can exhibit the right kind of life for their kids. So that they will salivate a little bit and say, well, what Dad's got, at least part of what he's got, maybe not all of what he's got, but at least part of what he's got, I'd like to have some of that. Instead of, I can't wait to get out the door and go to college or go to work and say goodbye. I can't wait to get out. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that from kids. That's not where we want to go. And that doesn't, all this is not falling on the parents' lives. We understand the kids have responsibilities too. But nevertheless, we have a great responsibility. Last, he said, I would make God an intimate friend of my family. That's pretty good. So what do your kids see you do when it comes to your friendship with God? I mean, do they think that, Dad is a self-made man? I don't need nobody? That's not good. Or do they say, no, I see Dad depending upon God for the decisions that he's making for our family. And I think with men, sometimes it's more difficult to become vocal about that. We do make these decisions, we think about things, we pray about them, but we tend to keep them to ourselves. And I think it's helpful if we go the extra mile and kind of push ourselves out of the envelope a little bit and vocalize the decisions that we sometimes make. Maybe not always, but sometimes that we make to guide our families or our own lives. When you do that, you are letting your son or daughter in on your friendship with God and how this is working. Of course, the master of that was Abraham. Gosh, look at the story he got to tell Isaac and the whole world about how God worked in his life. And so we want to be able to do that. We want to show our intimacy with God. We want to demonstrate that. When we say a prayer before our meals because we want to thank God for providing for us. So we don't just do that at the house, we do that in the restaurant. Why should we not pray and thank God for our food just because there's a bunch of people around us? We shouldn't be ashamed, we should be praying. Reading the Bible. And of course, what I help, told my kids about was, of course, listening to the New Testament on their app, on their phone. And so being engaged in the Scripture, and then, church is an important deal. Is church important for everybody? No. When I got saved back in 75, well, even back in the 50s, if you went to a Protestant church, a Baptist church, man, I mean, you're there every Sunday. In the 60s, you're there every Sunday. In the 70s, when I grew up, even into the 80s, you were, but then as you moved in the mid-80s, you got in the 90s, you're in today, going to church is not in vogue. I don't know if y'all know that or not. And I'm talking about a lot of folks who are church members don't see the value of being consistent in church for whatever reason. And there are lots of reasons, lots of competing vices out there. And so some will go once a month, some will go once a quarter, twice a year, whatever. They're not into this, we need to be there every Sunday, or not every Sunday, but almost every Sunday, right? They're not into that. They don't see the value of that. And all I would say is that I would not have the expectation that when your son or daughter grows up and gets on their own, that they're going to probably be going every Sunday because you didn't. It doesn't work that way. Now, God can certainly do a great work in their life, but I think that church is important, that fellowship again, that family gives you that sense of duty and responsibility and obligation, and it comes through making friendships at church. They tell us that if somebody comes to the church and they haven't made a friend within 6 months, they will not be here any longer. It's so important to make a friend, to make friends. And of course, that's why we have, one of the reasons why we have Bible study, Sunday school in the morning, so that you can get in a small group and you can make friends with people. Because in big church, we greet and everything, but you don't really get a chance to kind of let your hair down or whatever, take your shoes off. But you can do that in Sunday school. So church is important. I feel like the New Testament tells us that. So let's close. And I think this is kind of where you want to go as we think about drawing this to a close. And this was about a little story about a dad. And it highlights, I think, all the points that John made, Dressler. And his dad was a pastor, and his son was young. He was around 10 years old. And his son was diagnosed with cancer. And the doctors told Dad that his son only had a few days to live. There was nothing they could do for him. So obviously his dad very sad, and he's praying through this about how he's going to tell his son that he only has a few days to live. So he finally feels like that God has kind of helped him work through that and given him the right words. So he goes in there and he says, "Son," he said, "I have some bad news for you." He said, "The doctors told me you only have a few days to live." But the boy, of course, his dad knew, and the boy knew, that he had asked Jesus to come into his life before that. So he was a Christian, and it was going to be instant heaven for him when he died. But nevertheless, he needed to tell him that. And so his dad said, after that, he said, "Are you afraid to meet Jesus?" And he said his son blinked a little bit, and the tears kind of fell down his cheeks. And his son said bravely, he said, No, Dad, not if he's like you." That's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for. And we'll need a plan for that. We'll need to be doing lots of prayer. We'll probably need to be asking lots of forgiveness. And we probably need to learn how to become better friends. So there's your homework. Let's pray. So as you're praying about your own life as a father or a mother, and maybe some things you heard today would be applicable to you as a young person, grandparent, just an individual believer, let me just give you a moment or two. If God kind of touched you for a moment this morning about some aspect of the message today, something you need to ponder and consider and maybe ask God help for. As you're praying, I'll just give you a minute or two, and maybe there's someone here this morning that needs to make a decision for the Lord. You need to follow up. Maybe you've asked the Lord to come in your life. You never made it public. You haven't been baptized yet. You want to come forward this morning to let the church know that that's what you want to do. Or maybe someone here, this is where God wants our home or our fellowship. Or you just need prayer. Whatever it is, I'll be standing here at the front. And you just stand up and come. We'll just wait a couple minutes.